So thank you very much, all of you, for joining us this afternoon. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Daniel. I am the Managing Director here at Melbourne Masterclasses. And we know that you must all be incredibly tired of attending online events and staring at your screen. So we very much appreciate all of you for taking the time out of your Sunday afternoon to log on and have a bit of a chat with us. We're very much looking forward to it. All right, so let's get started then. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in to our first event as Melbourne Masterclasses. We thought that we'd get started actually by giving everyone an opportunity to get to know some of the people behind this operation, and especially to get to know Luke, who is our wonderful artistic director. Now, I know that a lot of you here, we see a lot of people from Frankston here today, which is wonderful. And we know that a lot of you know him in a professional capacity, but actually one question that as professional musicians we get asked a lot is, what is your life actually like? What do you do? How do you make money? All these things that for us are really mundane and, to be quite frank, very stressful most of the time. But actually, a lot of people who do not work in the professional music industry don't really have a sense of what that's like and how you get there. And so we really were hoping to provide a bit of an insight into that today. So while he needs no introduction, I'm going to make him uncomfortable and give him one. Luke is a award-winning concert cellist, composer, and conductor. As a cellist, he's made solo appearances with orchestras such as the Monash Academy Orchestra, the Frankston Symphony Orchestra, Essendon Symphony Orchestra, and Melbourne Symphonia. And as a chamber musician, he has done a lot of touring, especially in North America, including giving his debut in New York City last year with composer Evan Fine. As a composer, he is a recipient of the ABC Classic Australian Music Fund to commission a new work, which we're all very, very excited about hearing. Like with his performing, his works have also been performed all over the world. And as a conductor, which I'm sure is how many of you know him, he is the artistic director and principal conductor of the Bendigo Symphony Orchestra, as well as the choir master of the Frankston U3A Choir. So, thank you very much for joining us today, Luke. And thank you for sitting by and gritting your teeth as I did that.
It's always quite affronting to hear your bio read out in front of you.
Yes.
We're used to having it happen to us at concerts, but it's even more awkward on Zoom.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think everything that anything that's awkward in real life is about 10 times as awkward online. So let's get started with some questions. So basically, I am curious, for those of you who don't know, how did you actually become interested in cello composing and conducting? What sort of led you to those things?
Well, my introduction to classical music was through none of those things. I was actually a ballet dancer from the time that I was 4 years old. And upon becoming quite sick when I was like 9, 10 or so, I sort of started to look at other things. And I began the cello when I was 12. But prior to that, I had been sort of just interested in dabbling around at the piano and trying to write things and whatnot. And what's really interesting is that, well, what I find really interesting is that, in spite of all of my best efforts to become just a cellist, I've ended up doing so many other things, which just goes to show you that life often has a plan for you that you can't, you have very little control over. So yeah, through singing in choir, I started conducting, and then I started conducting choirs, and then I started conducting an orchestra. After that, through playing cello, I got to play in a lot of orchestras, so I was familiar by the time that opportunity came around with how they worked. And it's funny. It's not something that I set out to do with with this particular plan in mind, but nonetheless, it's just how it's panned out.
It is incredibly funny how sort of nothing happens for a very long period of time, and then all of a sudden everything happens at once. So for those who don't know my background personally, I actually, in addition to a violinist, I'm an economics major as well. And I frequently got asked, and am still frequently asked, why did you do both, and what could you possibly do with both of them? And to tell you the truth, I didn't have a good answer for a very, very long time, until Luke approached me maybe about a year ago and said, "Oh, would you be able to help me with this business that I'm trying to get started?" And I suppose that's now the answer that I give to people. But given that you have so many, like, you have so many interests, and your professional life encompasses so many different aspects. It's fairly recently that you've acquired a choir and an orchestra, and have had all these debuts of compositions around the world. I think something that interests a lot of people is how do you go from someone who has an interest in these things to someone who has all these professional opportunities that you have, in terms of touring, in terms of getting your works performed all over the place. How would you say that you actually went from music being a hobby and an interest and a love to actually being a career, and what's that been like?
Well, as I said, I spent a long time just trying to be a cellist, and what I find really interesting about music in general is that it's such a um, it's such a codependent network of people that make music, so without performers, composers can't exist, and without composers, performers can't exist, and without conductors, you can't have orchestras, and without orchestras, you can't have conductors either. And so I think being sort of starting out and playing recitals and things like that, and I ended up knowing a lot of performers, and then when I decided to sort of start spreading my wings a little bit and just dabbling in composition or writing pieces for friends and things like that, I found that I had an excellent network at my fingertips to start doing this. I had, friends who are fantastic musicians in their own right, that I could write for, that I could, make music with, and and I think the same thing applies to going into conducting as well. The Being a cellist provided me with a plethora of experience to move into conducting, and to start thinking about how I would lead an ensemble in any given circumstance, or how I would make sure that the choir that I was working with were breathing properly, or things like that. A lot of this stuff has just been kind of a big mixing pot of things that I've been able to I don't know, amalgamate, as it were, and they all feed each other. So everything that I've learned from conducting a choir teaches me how to be a better cellist, and I've learned everything that I've learned from trying to become a cellist has made me has led me to being a composer with a broader perspective, and I think that's really been the both like the blessing and curse of trying to become a professional musician, in the sense that you often don't know which direction to go in, and overall it becomes this kind of they weren't doors that I feel like I walked through, but they were doors that I just left open, and other things have walked through them in the meantime. Yeah, I.
Yeah, I often joke that it kind of feels like you fall through the doors rather than walk through them per se. But we just need to figure
Doors.
out a way for you to be an orchestra by yourself, and we can completely close the loop entirely, and you can you can just be your own symbiotic system, um, of conductor,
Yeah,
choir,
no.
orchestra, and composer. um, so obviously these are not normal times at the moment, but during normal times, what would you say that your typical day as a musician, or a typical day, as any of these things, looks like? And do you have a typical day?
Um, well, I think you hit the nail on the head in the sense that a very few days are actually typical one way or another. When I'm at home and things are sort of going along their semi-regular routine, it will comprise of mostly me trying to jam a whole bunch of different things in. So I know that I'll have to practice for X amount of time to make sure that I can actually play the pieces that I'm supposed to play next week. And it will comprise of a certain amount of score study and a certain amount of um, a lot of administration. And I think over a certain period of time, no matter what, you end up with a sort of a semi um, not even schedule, but a pattern or so of doing things. So like for me, composing usually happens late at night because I'm an excellent procrastinator, and also just because it's generally easier after I finish doing everything else to start thinking about creating something new. Administration usually happens first thing in the morning. Practice will happen somewhere in between, and then usually along those lines as well will happen a whole bunch of rehearsals. So I'll probably rehearse with my pianist at a certain point during the day, and then I will drive off somewhere else to have a choral rehearsal or an orchestral rehearsal, and it also comprises a lot of driving.
Mm.
So I'm very good at audiobooks.
Yes,
After all that time.
driving to and from work is my podcast time. Um, but I honestly think that if someone had told me, how many emails you'd have to write and respond to, I don't know if I would have chosen this path. Um, sort of extending on what a typical or an atypical day looks like. How does that differ from a day that you say have a concert or you have something that is like bigger than just a rehearsal coming up? What do those days look
Um,
like?
concert days of any kind really are almost always just devoted to that. I usually, if it's a cello concert, then that's what I'll do. I'll practice in the morning, rehearse for a little bit in the afternoon. I might take a nap depending on how late the concert is. And or if it's an orchestral concert and I have to drive, or a choir concert, it will usually involve me having to drive out to Bendigo or down to Frankston to so I mean that will take up a certain portion of the day. If it's an orchestral concert, I will drive and I will look over my scores in the morning, try and remember all the things that I've forgotten, and yeah, most of the time concert days are. But even if it is sort of an afternoon concert, something like that, by the time I'm finished with that, it's home and it's bedtime.
Yes, can definitely empathize with that. So going sort of even further into this notion of what professional life looks like, how do you actually make money? So what are the things that you're actually getting paid for, or what are you not getting paid for? I mean, that's a whole can of worms that we can open up at some stage.
Very badly, no. No, actually, the it's certainly the concept of finances, especially I think as a freelance musician, no matter what aspect you do, it constantly forces you to kind of reevaluate what your concept of enough is. So and how you deal with what you have, and how you and what you're willing to put on the line for it, and what you're not willing to put on the line for it. And it's definitely about it's definitely just for a certain part running the gauntlet. I think that you I feel much. I mean, present situations notwithstanding, I feel much better at managing things like that than I did maybe 3 years ago, or even a longer time ago. And it's and it's the process. I mean, generally speaking, being good at saving helps, because the income that you earn from a specific concert might keep you tide you over for the next 3 months or so, and the way that you've designed your schedule, it might need to do that. So I think it's accepting it's accepting not being able to see very far ahead of you all the time. And then the further you go on in life, the further ahead you can kind of see. I mean, it'd be nice if I could have predicted the pandemic, but the but the, you know the generally speaking, it's actually learning to be comfortable with a certain level of discomfort that keeps so it keeps a fire under your proverbial, and it keeps you moving through things that are challenging, both personally, financially, all of that stuff. And it brings it's a skill it's a skill just like any other. I think just like learning the toilet, it's a skill that you actually have to practice and learn and fail at and try again at. But I got the one of the best bits of advice was given to me by my singing teacher, actually, who, when I sort of straight out of university, when I said, like, I don't know if I can make this work, this is all quite, and she said, look, if you don't learn to do this now, you probably won't. So just, you have to accept the level of discomfort that you're sitting at right now and know that it will pan out. She goes, I can't say how it will pan out, but it will pan out. And it will, you will learn how to cope in every possible way along the way. It's not something you can really learn without trying to do it, I think.
Mm. Yeah, no, it is. It's very interesting. I think unfortunately, the whole feast or famine narrative holds up quite, quite well when it comes to looking at the career and the life of a freelance musician. Because I think there are some weeks that I am absolutely worked to the bone, and I look at how much money I'm making, and I think to myself, oh, if I just extrapolated this out for another 51 weeks, I would easily be in the top tax bracket. But most weeks, unfortunately, are not like that. But I think that's a really interesting answer in terms of what you're saying of it being, as with everything else that you do as a professional musician, a skill that you have to get better at. So we talk about a lot of struggles being a professional musician. What do you like about your job?
Um, the interesting thing that I think that's made this year as difficult as it has been is that I realize that music for me is not an end; it's a means of communicating, and it's a means of sharing experience and knowledge and love and anything else that you can think of. Really, you can find a way to do it through music. And it's been interesting for me to sit back and reevaluate at this point that music for me is not the be all and end all of what I live to do. What I feel like I get up in the morning to do is to share it. And part of doing that is practicing it and getting better at it, and doing the hard yards and all of that stuff. But the for me, it's about actually being able to share it with people. And I think that's something that I've carried with me everywhere. It's the reason I love orchestras and choirs so much, is because it is that we all get together in a room and we share an experience. And it's the reason that it's the reason that concerts are so enjoyable, because they could very easily be just stressful. But knowing that you've imparted something beautiful, and that the people that get to hear it kind of get to take that away with them, is something that's really is extremely touching, and it never ceases. It as long as I can keep doing that, it doesn't the fire doesn't stop being fueled. And the and as I said, that's what's been so interesting about this year in particular, because all of the usual means that we had to share anything the way we used to have kind of evaporated, at least temporarily. So we're all busy looking at new options and doing Zoom webinars, for example.
Yeah. So since you mentioned the current global state, COVID-19 has obviously changed a lot of things about classical music and the performing arts industry as a whole. But even prior to this, there's discussion has always swirled around classical music about its future and its relevance
Mm.
to people and to audiences, and you know, it's not a it's even though this current global context has heightened our sense of what this may be, that question mark has always been there. No more so than the current decade and the current century. Um, I suppose, what do you think? COVID notwithstanding aside, what do you think that the future of this industry looks like, and also what most excites you or fills you with dread as well? I suppose.
I don't know. I've personally, the future of classical music, or the future of music actually, because I don't think they necessarily need to be separated from stylistically.
Hmm.
Um, is it's I think as audience members, as musicians or whatnot, it's very easy to look at change like it's negative or like it's dying or like it's whatever. And because if you look, the funny thing is, if you read, reviews that composers wrote of each other's pieces 200 years ago, they wrote things like, oh, I didn't like this piece. Here marks the death of classical music. And you think, well, it's still around, and we're still doing it. And I think that's one of the really the really beautiful things about it is actually that it will be here long after any of us have gone, and nobody's attempt to get better at music, to enjoy it, to any has done anything to hinder it whatsoever. um it still exists, it's still around, it's still among us, and it's, I mean, look at what all of us are doing in quarantine. We're listening to our favorite recordings, we're enjoying our favorite television shows. All of that art was made by somebody. And it's such a vital part of everybody's life on such a grand scale that the future of it doesn't really worry me. The thing, I worry about my future sometimes, but that's so small. It's so infinitesimal on the grand scale of things. And I think that, I mean, we always have this discussion about, classical music being too this or too that, or too expensive or too cheap or too elitist or too whatever it is. But the reality is that, like as I said before, nobody's attempt to enjoy it in any way, whether that's taking part in it, consuming it as a listener, or as no, or to to want to improve their skills on an instrument, or singing in a choir or anything like that. Nobody's attempt to engage with music has has hurt music in any way. It's too big and too tough and too everything for any of us to think that we could possibly destroy it with one fell swoop, or one bad vowel placement. And I think that's one of the things that I take solace in, especially at a time like this, because I realize it's still going to be around. Because as long as we are, so as long as we stick around, it will it'll still be here. The I think people have been afraid of it dying for centuries, and it's still not dead. Which makes me think that it's going to be around. It will change drastically. It already has. This year alone has changed the way musicians express themselves, or need to find means of expressing themselves to an audience, or to a whatever, whether that's behind a screen, whether that's whether that's in concert halls, like in other countries at the moment, where they're able to have concerts that look drastically different from any other concert, where the audience is all separated and they're wearing masks, and there are things like that. But it's still something that we're continuing to keep doing. So personally, I don't think music's going anywhere. I think it's we worry about us, and I think that's the thing that's I try to remind myself not to do, is not to worry about my future per se, just to because, as I say, the other side of this, the other side of anything, really, music will still be around as long as there are people there to listen to it, and people there to do it. Um, it's existed since humans could speak. They were also communicating through some kind of art form, with drawing, music, whatever. And they'll keep doing that. I don't think that's going to change.
I think
I
that's
hope not.
a certainly much more enlightened perspective than mine. Uh, but to take a brief change of tact, um, they often say that there are all these sayings about failing upward and what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, etc. And that's all really really well and good and nice to hear in hindsight. I'm actually really really curious to hear about some of the instances where that thing did nearly kill you, or the failures that you had to endure to get to where you are. I think that's something that actually we don't talk a lot about in our industry, and I think also in 21st century modern society in general. Actually, is the various trials and tribulations that we have to go through to get to the point that we're at. So I'm actually just very curious if you have any interesting anecdotes or stories for us with that regard.
Oh, I think for me, I don't know how I don't know how entertaining it is for me. But the thing that the thing that I always seem to come across, and it's a lesson I continually have to relearn, is the concept of what for me is the failed pathway. So it's the I applied for that, I didn't get into it, or it's the I applied, and there are like I've genuinely lost count of the things that I didn't get, or the things that the failures that I have. Because I mean, I feel like if I kept tabs on them, I'd probably give up before now. But the 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 thing that I often the process of relearning or kind of identifying yourself, as you kind of try to find your pathway through the arts world, is for me is that when you think you were going on a certain trajectory, or whatever, like, oh, I know I'm going. For me, it was being a cellist. I'm going to, and the irony is that I'm still a cellist, and that becoming a bunch of other things didn't stop me from doing that. But nonetheless, I was afraid that they would, and I spent a lot of time agonizing over the fact, like, oh well, I'm not good enough for this. I'm not good enough for that. I can't be what I thought I wanted to be. I can't be what I thought was going to make me happy. Um, and the um, for, and so the thing that I always find myself coming up with is just this feeling of um, the mourning the pathway that I had predicted, or that I had expected, or whatever it was, and then allowing myself to kind of walk the new one. And there have been so many new ones. So I think that if I were to draw on a map the way that life has gone thus far, it's a lot of like very short, like, and then just complete devastation. You're like, no, okay, we'll go that way. Like, it's it's just weaving it was seemingly random path through lots of things. So I think it's the capacity to reinvent yourself, or to re and not like reinvent yourself like, oh, I'm a whole new person, but rather to sort of reinvent how you see yourself, that allows that progression to continue. That for me is what I try and hold on to. It'd be, like, in my dark moments, it'd be great if I could take my own advice, but there we go.
Yep. No, I think that's, as I said, it's all very well and good to sort of sit here and talk about advice like that and things like that in hindsight. I think it would be much easier if we could all swallow that pill while we were while we were crying over the
In the moment.
the 40th rejection letter that you've received.
Yeah.
On to sort of slightly happier memories. Tell us a little bit about some really memorable performances or experiences that you've had as a musician.
The, the performances where you can just let everything go, and they sit back in your mind of like just those like golden hour moments where I didn't feel like I didn't mess up particularly badly. I didn't do, but it's that feeling of control. It feels like it's as close to what I imagine flying would feel like personally flying, not in
We've had enough of that.
And it's happened to me very rarely, honestly. I get glimpses of it in each performance that you do. Um, I I really like I said, I really love sharing music. So um one my favorite memories from music um have always been an opportunity of sorts to kind of make something magical happen with other people. And the ones that like stick out in my mind are again they would surprise the teenage Luke, I think. The I I think it's often never the like the grandest things that you do, or the whatever that you take away from things like that. So like I've been so lucky. I think about looking back, and like I got to playing in playing in Europe, or playing in New York City, and things like that. The things that you would think stick out, but the things that really that really come to my mind are much much humbler things, like I just a particularly random, well, it's not random, but a cello recital that I did, or a trio recital actually that I did a number of years ago. And the thing that made that concert so special was that this little kid comes up to me afterwards and says, like, "Oh, I really want to learn the cello," and I was like, "Oh, good for you." uh, that's what I remember, or things where the all my U3A choir members can attest to the fact that I put them through the gauntlet, making them learn a Sarah Hopkins piece last year, and it was one of the performance of that was really transformative for me, at the very least, because I think that it was one of those moments where where I think everybody came together and realized that it's worth putting in the hard yards for something like that, because this piece in particular is very meditative and quite ethereal, and the overwhelming effect that had both on the choir and the audience on that particular day will never recreate. You can't have that back, but you can have different ones. But those are the things that stick out. It's never the big like, oh wow, that happened, or that those are the things that I take away with me and think about later.
Oh, that's making me really miss the concert hall at the moment. Um, all right, so I'll give you one more question, because I do wanna make sure that we've got enough time for everyone to ask their questions, which, as I said, I think will be more interesting. But I've heard you on many occasions speak very fondly of your mentors and your teachers, and I understand that obviously a large part of why we're actually here in this webinar today is because of that. But I guess if this, I'm going to give you an opportunity here to tell us a bit more about your key mentors and teachers, what you've learned from them, what you love about them. Yeah, no, please tell us, because I'm very interested to hear.
Um, the I think the thing that I think it's easy to forget, because we always think there's always like one or two little, one or two significant figures in everyone's life, but the process of it taking a village, or the idea of it taking a village to raise a child, it takes an earth to raise a musician. I've had so many wonderful mentors, but of the ones that stick out, I was very lucky to have two incredibly influential cello teachers: Josie Baines, who's from Melbourne, and Karina Georgian, who is Russian but she lives in the UK. Um, and the interesting thing is that like I could not have had two more differing styles of education. Um, the the Josie really, I mean, there's the analogy of teaching a man, give a man efficiently for a meal and teach him efficiently for a lifetime. And Josie metaphorically taught me to fish. that she taught me how to learn things myself. She taught me how to practice, and she taught me how to not be overwhelmed by trying to acquire knowledge that I thought was insurmountable to me. And without that, I wouldn't have at all been prepared for what Corinne put me through in England. And Corinne was she was very typical Russian school of playing and of teaching. Was very prescriptive and very and in many cases extremely intimidating, while at the same time being incredibly warm. And she taught me, and without that galvanizing experience from Josie, or that attitude of being able to learn things for myself, or be able to do things for myself, and overcome, using the tools that I had developed to overcome that style of teaching, I think I would have just crumbled. But lo and behold, I still play the cello. I think, yeah, but honestly, it's not the big things that you take away from those. I mean, there are significant moments in those experiences. The one that's currently on the website, I think for me was a particularly life-changing moment in that. In the first time I got to the course, there was 5 other cellists in the course the first time I did it, and they had all come from like amazing, great big schools in Europe, and here I was playing my Debussy sonata, and in the first instance of trying to play it in the lesson, I couldn't even finish it. I was such a nervous wreck, and I was so visibly upset and whatnot. And she just sort of pulled me aside, and she said, "Look, everybody's got something to give to this art form, and if you don't give it, both you or I won't know what it is." And I think in that moment I was like, "Oh, okay, here we go." And by the end of the course, I certainly wasn't the best one, but I hazard a guess at saying I was the most improved. And taking that attitude with me through other things, those are the things that make truly life-changing events. I mean, we spent hours and hours learning how to hold the bow correctly and how to breathe properly and all of that stuff, but all of that practical knowledge is so easily outshined by significant moments like that, where you realize that your pathway is relevant, and it doesn't look the way you think it's going to now, but it's going to make something hopefully beautiful in the future. And those are the things that I take with me. That those are the really significant moments that I think are the most important, and they're the things that I try to think when life or music or whatever it is asks more strength of me than I think I might have in any given moment. Is that I realize I don't actually have to be on top of this right now, as long as I continue to try to be.
I think that's a really, really good place to leave it. On that profound note, I do want to talk briefly about, you mentioned that beautiful story with you attending Corinne's course in the UK. And I mean, I've personally heard that story many times before, but I actually, no. I really enjoy it every single time that I listen to it, because I think we, as musicians, but also as people, I think we need to be constantly reminded of that fact. So I'm actually wondering how that ties into why we're all sitting here in front of a computer today, and if you wanted to tell us a bit about how that's all come to be.
I started Melbourne Masterclasses a couple of years ago now, and it was we started with bringing it was the ethos behind my thoughts back then were that I wanted to bring that kind of experience that I could have really only got by going to see someone like Corinne. I wanted to bring that here for students of music and things like that. And since then we organized 2 courses with visiting artists from overseas. And I think wanting to sort of expand on that or extrapolate on it, the ethos behind providing everybody with that kind of opportunity to find their place in music, whether that's professional or as somebody who enjoys listening to it, or as somebody who enjoys taking part in it. Or no matter what way you want to engage with music, I think wanting to bring about a culture of taking part and of seeing the value in everybody's experience with music, because it's there for everybody to enjoy. It doesn't belong to anybody in particular, and it certainly doesn't belong to an elite group of people. The thing that was most profound to me about that moment was not necessarily that she said that to me, but she was one of the most famous cellists of the 20th century, and she could have very easily gotten better students. You know, like it wasn't the only reason I was there is because I wanted to be, and in the end, it was the significant thing about that moment was just that I realized, wow, like she could have really easily just told me to go away. It would have, but she didn't. And somebody with that plethora of experience and that lifetime invested in art and in music had that to say to somebody who wasn't at that stage providing, who certainly didn't believe at that moment that they were providing anything of value to music in and of itself. Was something that I wanted to carry through and bring into, well, I'd like to bring it everywhere, but Australia happens to be my home, so we're going to start here.
So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to us ramble on for a bit. Thank you for your questions. And thank you for popping in and saying hi today. I know everyone's sort of incredibly isolated at the moment, so it's actually been really, really lovely to see some new faces for me. I'm sure for Luke to see some old friends again. All right, take care, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.